there are so many benefits to remote work, but we have to do it mindfully. Partly because it has a cost for well-being, it has a cost for relationships, and it has a cost for work outcomes such as creativity and innovation and deep thinking.
When you log on for work, where are you set up? Is it a commute into the office, a desk at home, or a mix of both? Because the way white-collar workers operate has changed. What started as a pandemic response has become a 6-year real-world experiment. And now we can take stock on what's working and what isn't. There are clear upsides. You have more flexibility and more autonomy over how work fits into life. But there's a downside too. That same flexibility can let work creep into everything. Emails after dinner, Zoom calls at odd hours, and no real off switch. UNSW Scientia professor Manju Ahuja calls this tech intrusion, and it's reshaping how you think and how you make decisions. I'm Dr. Juliet Burke, adjunct professor at the School of Management and Governance, and this is The Business Of, a podcast by the UNSW Business School. Manju, can you set the scene for knowledge workers in Australia in 2026? How are we working now?
Yep.
And what's fundamentally changed compared to a few years ago?
COVID changed everything because we were thrown into it. Everybody had to work from home. There was no alternative. And thankfully, because of Zoom and Teams and Skype back then and all these technologies, we were able to keep going like nothing happened. You know, people were still productive. They were still working. There were very few interruptions. And now what's happened is that people have a taste of it. So you can get your work done, but you're also home. You don't have to commute. So there's time savings, cost savings. And kids get picked up on time and things get done and you can catch up on work later if needed. So it's just all very flexible and people have a taste of it and they are not giving it up.
Do you think we're doing flexibility in 2026 differently to the initial burst?
Mm-hmm.
Are there fundamental things about the way we're doing flexibility now compared to the initial burst at COVID?
In some sense, because the fact is, you know, because we were thrust into it, this wasn't a gradual move where we learned things and then we changed something and then we learned more and we changed something. It was just one shot. So what I would say is that we are in a transition period where we are learning and there's this tension. So two things are happening simultaneously. Employees want to work from home. They don't want to give it up. But some employers want people to come back because they think it's better for productivity. And if they can't see people working, they don't know if they're really working. They feel like the team culture is not there and they find it hard to monitor.
So what does a typical work from home day look like now compared to pre-COVID?
You know, people have their meetings, so that's the structured time. Beyond that, I think it's quite flexible. So you might take time to pick up kids. You might take time to prep dinner. And then you might come back to work after dinner and catch up on those things that you might have done during those times. So it's all very fluid. It's all very flexible. And we did this interesting study recently where what happens when two partners work from home. So these are some challenges where, okay, so what if you're sharing an office? What if you're sharing a space and you're both on Zoom calls at the same time? How do you plan out the day? Are you planning out who's picking up the kids? Who's planning dinner? Who's doing dinner? Who's paying the bills? And is that happening during the time or shopping? Because of this flexibility and because there's no specific work hour, right? So we're not doing 9 to 5. We're working whenever, wherever. The flip side of it is from manager's perspective, they too can reach you anytime, anywhere. And sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not, and they're not clear. So it's all, transitional and fluid from their perspective also.
the integration between sort of work and life and the ability for someone to contact you whenever they need contact, is that a good thing? Is that a benefit for individuals and for organisations, or what's your perspective?
I would say there are benefits, but on balance, it's not. There are benefits, of course, that, I could be at my daughter's ballet recital and answer some emails. So that's the benefit. And you feel productive. You feel like you got something done. But the problem with this constant connectivity is always on mentality is that you lose focus, the kind of focus you need for creativity, for deep work, that goes missing because you're always being interrupted. And the more you're interrupted, you kind of come out of that focus. And a very interesting tidbit is that even if you take a second to decide whether or not to respond to this notification, you're already out of that focus because you had to make that decision.
I think I heard that it takes 20 minutes to get into
Exactly.
flow.
Precisely.
Is that the biggest challenge or the downside to the flexibility that we now have, is that we're always on?
I would say yes, partly because it has a cost for well-being. It has a cost for relationships. And it has a cost for, work outcomes such as creativity and innovation and deep thinking.
And what does it do for our brains if we're always on? Are we in fact more productive because we're always thinking about work?
No, we think we are, but actually we're not. There's one type of productivity which one might say, yeah, okay, because you got this done and then that done in small bursts. But there's another kind of more meaningful, more really relevant productivity where you're getting real thinking done, you're creative, you are making good decisions, and those are the things that matter in the long run.
And so just thinking about then this sort of abundance of tasks that we think that we're really effective with tasks, who are the people that are doing most of those tasks? And are there a group of people who've been able to manage that creativity side of it, put some boundaries in place?
There's this theory of flow. You get into the flow of things. And I actually had this conversation with Csikszentmihalyi, and he said young people get into this flow of multitasking because, the fact is there's no such thing as multitasking. We cannot do two things at a time. So what we're doing is fast switching, which is where we lose the focus. And so we can't really do anything quite well. But he's of the opinion that young people they grew up with this and they're in the flow of that. Now, it's not been tested, but also there are differences in how people think. Like for me, I'm more a big picture thinker. So if a lot of detail shows up my way, I get bored quickly. I'm not interested. But there are those who thrive on it. So there are differences.
Interesting. And what do you think about the ideas of not just cognitive overload, but actually brain rot if we're constantly task switching?
Yeah.
Maybe it sounds like it's good for some people, but for the majority, does it work?
It does not. There's, in fact, research to show that with most people, with most things, we get better as we do more of something. With multitasking, we get worse over time. And the reason is that there's this exhaustion that sets in, and the brain becomes less and less effective and quick.
So are there some groups that experience more disadvantage as a result of the preponderance to work from home?
I think women. So, the society expects women to take on more of the work tasks at home. And I think that shows up because now that they are home, they end up doing more of both, right? So they're doing their work, but they're also picking up more of the other. And that actually shows up in our partner study that I was just talking about a minute ago, where we've found that they were doing more of the invisible work, which is cognitive load on top of their work load. So, yeah, they are definitely affected more by it.
So one way of thinking about this hybrid experiment that we've been through is it might give people managers more confidence to do other flexibility experiments. Have you heard of a country or a workplace that's doing something interesting?
Yeah. So we know about Microsoft Japan, where they tried 4 days work week and their productivity went up by 40%. So basically, their motto has been work shorter time, rest well, and learn more. So that is one success story we can talk about. And there are other models that people have followed. So some cases it's been 5-day work week and the alternate 4-day work week and so on. Others have compressed their work day into 4 days by not reducing hours, but just making those 4 days longer. So Belgium's actually done that. So yeah, there are all kinds of different models people are using.
And do you think that's in part because we've gone through a sort of global collective experiment and people are prepared to experiment now? Can I draw that logic?
I think so.
Let's take a step back. Many organisations now have these flexible work arrangements for their staff. It's really stabilised, but COVID really rushed in and maybe people didn't have a chance to set up things in the way that they would have if things had been differently. Can you unpack that at a practical level? What skills and capabilities have managers had to develop when they don't see their workforce day to day? And then, of course, we'll go to, and what do they still need to learn?
I would say we are developing, is how I would put it. So if you don't see somebody, how do they know what's happening, if what got done, what didn't get done? So that's one thing, the monitoring aspect. Job design is another thing, where what kind of tasks can be done remotely, what kind of tasks require people to come back in. And then another big aspect is the culture, where how do you create that team feeling, the team bonding, the cohesion? And that takes really deliberate planning to say, yeah, people should come in and we would just bond. But that's not how it works. Because when people don't want to come in and they are made to come in, what happens is that they look for workarounds. So they come in, have a coffee with a friend, have a meeting, and then they leave. They're calling this a kind of hush hybrid, where sometimes they work out with their manager. Yeah, I'm required to come in, but is it okay if I come in 3 days a week and not 4? And, there are these informal tacit agreements. And then coffee badging, just coming in, doing something, and then leaving. So these are acts of resistance. So managers are having to figure out, okay, so what is really effective? What can I ask them to do? When can I ask them to come in? And have some compliance around it.
So what have managers learned then? I mean, it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
So surely there's been some skill development for managers. Where has that left them?
I think what we have learned in our research is that people are looking at a range of supervising skills. So we heard people say, well, so I would trust people to do things until they prove me otherwise. And if there's something that I feel needs supervision, then I'll start monitoring more. So they're learning to sort of do this agile management, which can vary from task to task, team to team, person to person, and they're just having to be flexible themselves.
Does that mean at the beginning those managers might have been micromanagers and now
Yes.
they've learnt to have distance?
Yes, exactly.
And are there other skills that managers have learned?
Yeah, so I think, when people do come in, how do you engage? I was just saying that people would come in and then you just expect cohesion to happen, which is not the case. You have to deliberately make that happen. So you have to create activities that bring people together. You have to create social time where everyone is there. Because if you're having people come in, say, 3 days a week, but everyone's coming in at different times, so really it's not going to have that same impact. And then the other thing is space management, right? So you have this hot desk notion where people come in, they sign up for a desk. And more, I've read many stories where people come in and they have no space to sit. So they're having to learn that.
Particularly because I think there was a diminution in space.
Yes.
Because people were saying, or
Yeah,
organizations were saying, well, we're not using that space. Why are we paying for that
exactly.
space? But now they're having to expand again.
Exactly. So cost cutting happened, and now they don't have the space.
So, what skills do you think managers still need to learn?
So, one big thing we all need to learn, employees and employers, is time management, self management, but also from a manager's perspective, blocking out time for deep work, deep thinking, for creative work, where you're not interrupted unless there's something urgent. That would be one big thing from their perspective. And then from the employee's perspective, how to manage their time, where this creating separations deliberately is important for them too.
Is that where this right to disconnect finds its path?
Yeah, absolutely. So companies as well as countries are thinking about this, right? So there's several countries which have said, okay, there will be no work-related communication during the weekend or after hours and so on. Many countries have gone to having regulation around requiring companies to have specific policies around all of this and around communication, when, where, and actually lay it down and have that published.
Any tips that you might give managers as to how to manage flexibility a bit better?
So, my biggest recommendation would be to have clear policies around all these things we've been talking about rather than having ad hoc, yet leaving room for flexibility that managers can have autonomy around. So that means we train managers to supervise, to monitor, and how to do that, what works when. It means that we have policies that are consistent around communication, deep thinking time, etc. It means we think about employee well-being and their right to disconnect. It means that we create a culture of trust. We create a culture of outcome measurement rather than process measurement and presence. So these are all things we have to start thinking about. And what I would say is that there are so many benefits to remote work, but we have to do it mindfully.
Some people would say that Australia has a work hard, play hard culture.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's true, how then it plays into this flexibility that we have. Do we put more emphasis on the social side of it? What does it mean about banter, being part of the team? What does it make for our culture, whether we're more resistant to working from home because we don't see people?
Yeah.
What's your view on Australia and flexibility?
In the rest of the world, about 70% of the people would say flexibility is important to them. In Australia, it's 95. So almost everyone values that here. Like you say, work hard, play hard. So they are very particular about having their time and just making sure that they're not going back to work 5 days a week. 70-some% say if they were required to do that, they would actually look for alternate employment. So retention is an issue. And this is actually especially true for women, for highly skilled workers. These are the people you want to keep, right? These are the scarce resources.
I'm just thinking about communication. And one of the things that we know happens with people working from home is that they have to use email communications more, emojis, texting.
Yeah.
But a lot can be lost in translation.
Yes.
Can you tell me anything about the way that Australians like to communicate and how that has changed or needs to change in the context of working from home?
Yeah, I can speak to that personally, in fact, because I come from the US and I have a habit of, sending out a 2-sentence email, which gets right to the point. And what I've learned here is that, emails here start with Happy Friday and end with cheers and hope your weekend's going well. So we do that here. And now I have learned I write my email and then I pad it in the front and back. So I think we are finding that culture, I think, staying on, really. I see in emails they're very friendly, but then in the middle there is that direct part, which is necessary. And sometimes it takes a bit of back and forth with clarifications, because I think a lot of people rely on Teams and their messages are short and people are a little bit less formal.
So a hybrid workplace is perfect for some businesses, perfect for some jobs,
Yeah.
but for other ones, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
A factory can't move its production
Right.
site to your house, for example.
Yeah.
What are the implications of that? Do we end up having sort of two speeds in our economy, one who's doing flexibility and one who's not?
There are some sectors that have traditionally done flexible work, right? Technology, people are used to working from home. Consultants, creative industries, they're used to working from home. But they need that sort of flexibility, autonomy, time to think. But then there are some industries where you can't. So finance would be one because you have high security involved. You're moving large sums of money. Manufacturing, you have to be on the floor or in the lab. And then healthcare, where you have to be there to take care of someone, for example. So one size does not fit all in this case.
That makes sense. Does it have any larger consequences for us as an economy when you have growth in ways of working, but the other is still doing it as it was pre-COVID?
Yeah, but that's always been the case. So some industries, people have to go in. Healthcare, you can't take care of a patient from home. So it's true, but I think it means that we have to think about these implications before we create policies that we say should apply to everybody.
So how prepared now are Australian businesses to ensure that we work from home well, that we do it better than we've done it before?
Yeah, I think we are quite prepared, not fully, but quite. We are figuring out ways of managing time, tasks, and policies around communication and space and so on. But there's still a lot to be done. I mean, we've done a lot of interviews with managers who are doing these things, and they're figuring it out. We talked to one person who said, well, I hired this person 6 months ago. I haven't met them yet, but they're getting the work done, so I'm not worried.
That's Manju Ahuja, Scientia Professor in the School of Information Systems and Technology Management at UNSW's Business School. And if you're interested in how to create better, healthier workplaces, listen to our previous episode with Associate Professor Carlo Capenecchia on psychosocial safety at work.
This is not about managing people with mental ill health. It's about managing the things in your business that could create those outcomes. You have a duty to control the things within your control, the way the work is organised, supervised, managed, where it's done, how it's done.
You'll find the link in the episode description. The Business Of is brought to you by the University of New South Wales Business School, produced with Dead Set Studios.